Scott Wright from DraftCountdown.com has his latest mock draft updated today. He just got finished that and kind enough to join us now to talk about it here on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. Welcome back, Scott. How are you?
Hey, I'm excellent. Good to be back.
Yeah, man, and we're getting close. I know your mock draft updated today. Let's start at the top where Laramie Tunsil, the offensive tackle, going to the Titans number 1. I guess the real question is how possible is it that Tennessee makes that pick?
I think that's the most likely scenario. I think the only other option they would consider at number 1 would be Jalen Ramsey, the defensive back from Florida State, and they certainly have a need in the secondary, but a defensive back hasn't gone number 1 overall since 1956, so that would definitely be breaking with precedent to a certain degree. And Tunsil is exactly what they need. They have to protect Marcus Mariota. Everything revolves around him, and he took a beating last year. He missed a quarter of the season with the injuries. He got sacked way too much. Tunsil just makes perfect sense. He's the best player in this draft and a legitimate stud. I think he's kind of confirmed throughout this pre-draft process that he's every bit as good as we thought he was, and maybe even a little better. So I think in terms of the 3 options for the Titans at 1, I think the most likely would be Tunsil. Number 2, I think, would probably be a trade down. If somebody becomes infatuated with the quarterback and wants to get ahead of the Cleveland Browns at number 2, I think there's a deal to be made there, and the Titans have let it be known they're willing to listen to offers, and I think Ramsey would be the 3rd choice. But I think Tunsil is clearly the way for them to go.
All right, Scott, we talked about this yesterday on the show. I want to get your opinion. How many guys in this draft are worthy of the number 1 overall pick?
That's a good question. And I would probably say as many as 5. I would go as deep as 5. But as I've said, too, Tunsil is my number 1. He's been number 1 since the beginning. And then number 2 is Jalen Ramsey. I think those are both pretty special talents. And then for me, there's a little bit of a drop-off to Joey Bosa, the defensive end from Ohio State, and Miles Jack, the linebacker from UCLA. But it's a good draft. It's not the type of year where we have a surefire number 1 overall. It's not an Andrew Luck type of player, but it's a strong top of the draft. I think the top 5 to 6 overall picks is probably going to be as strong as we've seen in recent years. It's good depth.
Scott, Howie Roseman said 10, and then it drops off. Do you agree?
10 might be pushing a little bit, but I don't think there's any question that Philadelphia put themselves in another tier by moving from 13 to number 8. I think they're going to be looking at a different type of prospect there. And I'll be interested after the draft. Maybe we'll get a little bit more information. It's that time of the year where teams are kind of playing games. You can never really get a truthful answer out of teams. But I wonder if when the Eagles made that deal, if they had a specific player in mind that they didn't think they would get at 13, that they thought they could get at 8, or if it was more a matter of, well, we get to kind of clear house and maybe move on from some past mistakes. And, we also get to move up 5 picks in the draft, too. So I'm interested to see which way it goes, because you can make an argument either way. You look at, in my new mock draft, I have them taking Ezekiel Elliott, the running back from Ohio State, and they probably wouldn't have gotten him at number 13. And it's kind of ironic. For years we've had the running back position be devalued, and we've seen top running backs slide, whereas this year there's actually a number of teams that could be targeting Elliott and maybe even be willing to move up for him. You look at the Giants, the Bears, the Dolphins, the Raiders, even the Lions down a little further. There's a bunch of teams in that middle of the first round area that could be looking at Elliott, and he is without question the top runner in this class. So I think he makes the most sense for the Eagles, but I could see them going with an offensive tackle like Ronnie Stanley from Notre Dame, maybe a cornerback like Vernon Hargreaves III from Florida. I think the Eagles are going to have options there at number 8, but I just wonder if they really had a single player in mind, or if it was just a matter of let's get rid of Maxwell and Alonso and move on from that.
Yeah, that's something that I wanted to follow up with, because were they just willing to move up a couple spots just to get rid of those guys? Because if they moved up from 13 to 8, do you envision then them going from 8 and back down? I mean, do them moving up 5 spots mean that they're probably out of the game of moving back then?
Not necessarily, yeah. I mean, if they didn't have one specific player in mind, I'm sure they're going to be open to listening to offers. And Elliott is a guy who I think is going to have a bit of a market with people trying to get up if they want to target the top runner in this class. So absolutely, I think that's something to keep an eye on, and they could move down a little bit. And I think the more interesting side of this trade might actually be the Miami Dolphins, because 2 of the players I mentioned, Elliott and Hargreaves, are 2 areas where the Dolphins have a huge need. And they're probably going to miss out on those 2 guys picking at number 13 overall. I think there's a chance one of those guys could be still available at 13, but it's much less likely at 13 than it would have been at number 8. So if I'm a Miami Dolphins fan, I'm asking myself, was it worth taking on Byron Maxwell's contract and taking a flyer on Kiko Alonso to move down 5 spots that might cost us maybe our number 1 or number 2 target in the draft? I think that's the more interesting side of that equation.
Scott Wright, draftcountdown.com. So many interesting things. I think the Eagles at 8 are in such a weird spot because of what you limit yourself to pick when you're that high in the draft. And interior line is a spot they sorely need, but you don't really take that spot in the draft. Of the tackles that would be there at 8, how many do you envision that could slide down and play guard for a year or two?
I think all of them are pretty much capable of that. I mean, you look at John Ogden. When he came into the league, he played guard for his first year before eventually moving over to tackle. So I think they're all capable of doing that. Tunsil's going to be long gone for the Eagles at 8, but I think Ronnie Stanley might very well be there. And then there's not as much of a drop-off from Stanley to, say, Taylor Decker from Ohio State or Jack Conklin from Michigan State, as a lot of people might believe. So if they wanted a blocker, they could probably move down a half a dozen spots and still get a good blocker with similar value in the teens as opposed to number 8 overall. But you're right. I mean, it's positional value, and they need to start thinking about replacing Jason Peters long term. He's 34 years old. He hasn't exactly been the picture of health, but it might be a little a blocker in the top 10 overall that you're going to play a guard from the offset, but it's happened. There's definitely precedent for it, and that's the area where they have a need. But I think probably be looking more towards an interior offensive lineman a little later in the draft, and the values would be. Now, of course, they don't have their second-round pick, so that's going to take somebody like Cody Whitehair from Kansas State or Joshua Garnett from Stanford out of the equation. But in the third round, they could be looking at Vidal Alexander from LSU, Christian Westerman from Arizona State, and even to the middle rounds, that's where the value is going to be at offensive guard. So I think with the number 8 overall pick, you're trying to get somebody who's going to come in and be an impact player. And I'm just not sure that they're going to be looking down the road unless they think Jason Peters really is on his last leg.
Do you think that, you mentioned Vernon Hargreaves the third, do you think he makes it to the 8th spot? Because I think that he would be an interesting guy for the Eagles to pass on if he was there at number 8.
Yeah, and that's going to be one of the interesting storylines to keep an eye on in the draft is where does that run on the second tier cornerback start? Jalen Ramsey from Florida State is going to be one of the top 3 to 5 overall picks, and I think based on the film, you can make a really good argument that Vernon Hargreaves III belongs in the top 10 overall. He's just a really, really good football player, and he does everything well. The problem is he doesn't have that prototypical size and length that you look for. And he came in a little, I think about 5'10" and a half at the scouting combine. And it wouldn't be completely unprecedented for a corner that size to go in the top 10 overall. It's absolutely happened, but it's just relatively rare. So I wouldn't be shocked if he slid a little bit further than people expected either. But I think anywhere in that 6 to 13 range is where you're going to see Hargreaves come off the board. But no question, in my mind, he's the 2 corner in this draft. It's just that lack of size with both him and Mackenzie Alexander from Clemson that kind of clouds their situations, and maybe it opens up the door for someone like Eli Apple from Ohio State or even William Jackson III from Houston to kind of move up and come off the board a little earlier than expected just because they offer the size at that position that Hargreaves and Alexander do not.
All right, let's get into the quarterback stuff because Wentz had his pro day, and I want to get your thoughts on what that did for him. Did that move him above anybody? Do you still have him in the same spot following his workout?
No, I think what Wentz is doing is just firming up his grasp on the top quarterback slot in this draft, and he's really been doing it all offseason, starting with his performance in the FCS National Championship game, just an outstanding performance at the Senior Bowl, both on and off the field, and that went a long way towards alleviating concerns about the level of competition. By all accounts, he is acing the interviews. He's really impressing people with his intelligence. I believe I read he scored a 40 out of 50 on the Wonderlic, which is an outstanding score. And then a strong pro day performance, which most top quarterbacks do have a strong pro day performance, with the exception of Teddy Bridgewater. It's very rare that you hear about a quarterback really struggling at his pro day. It's so rehearsed that they're ready for it. But I think Wentz is the perfect fit for the Cleveland Browns at number 2. I think he's exactly what they have been looking for. And is he a sure thing? Is he Andrew Luck? Absolutely not. It's going to be a risk, but it's a risk the Browns have to take at number 2 because until they get a quarterback, nothing else is going to matter. And they're at the point now where they have to worry about maybe somebody else falling in love with Wentz and trying to trade ahead of them at number 2. But I think the Browns are considering Wentz and Goff, but when push comes to shove, I think Wentz is their guy.
Now, some reports that the Eagles went to watch Jared Goff work out the other day. Is he a guy they would have to trade up for?
I think so, and maybe not really far because I have my new mock draft. I have him going to the 49ers at number 7 overall, and this is a bit of a strange draft in that the teams picking in the top 5 to 6, there aren't as many that need a quarterback as we're accustomed to seeing. Part of it is because teams like Dallas and Baltimore had some injuries there. You look at the Titans had the injury, and they've already invested in young signal callers. So there's a chance the number 2 quarterback won't come off the board until outside of the top 5. But I think the 49ers at number 7, they have to be staring down Goff. And if he's there, I think they're going to pull the trigger on him. But the Eagles could stand pat at number 8 and get Paxton Lynch from Memphis, who I actually think more highly of than Goff. It's kind of a 1A, 1B situation for me with Wentz and Lynch. So I'm a really big fan of Paxton Lynch. And if I were the Eagles, I would absolutely still be considering a quarterback at number 8 overall. I just would not be willing to hitch my fortunes to Sam Bradford and Chase Daniel. Now, I don't think they will. I think they feel comfortable at the quarterback position for the time being. I think that's going to be a mistake. But as I said, if I were them, I would absolutely still be looking at quarterback, even though I don't think they will.
That's interesting because yesterday we were talking about with the Goff stuff, you just signed Bradford, you just got Chase. Now, you might not like those guys, but you put a lot of money in those guys. Isn't it worth trying to find that impact player that you're talking about at number 8 rather than drafting a quarterback who – I don't know what your feeling is on these quarterbacks. Do you see a guy who's a legitimate franchise or, upper tier starting quarterback in this league to where you can pass on filling some other needs when you just signed 2 quarterbacks to a lot of money?
Well, and I always say that the golden rule of the NFL draft is that unless you already have a franchise quarterback, you don't pass on one. And I don't think the Eagles have one. And I think Wentz, Lynch, and Goff all have a chance to be that. And even though I'm not quite as high on Goff as some, I think there's a drop-off from Wentz and Lynch to Goff. I still have no problem. If you're in the top half of the first round and you need a quarterback, take a chance. I would much rather go with one of these young guys than just hitch my wagon to Bradford and Daniel, especially Bradford, who has probably destroyed more seasons than any starting quarterback in the league between injuries and poor play in the last decade. I just would not feel comfortable, but they obviously do. They gave him quite a bit of money for the next couple of years. And one good thing, though, for the Eagles is even if they don't go quarterback at number 8, there's going to be some developmental signal callers beyond the first round that you could legitimately see developing into starters in the NFL one day. And we couldn't say that a year ago. This year, there's a lot of options, whether it be Cardale Jones from Ohio State, Connor Cook from Michigan State, Christian Hackenberg from Penn State, and then even further down lines in the middle rounds, Dak Prescott from Mississippi State, Jacoby Brissett from North Carolina State. This is a good year to get a developmental quarterback. Now, if I were the Eagles, I'd be aiming a little higher just because I'm so dubious of Bradford and Daniel. But I think they're going to bring in a quarterback at some point, but I think it's probably going to be more towards the middle, maybe even late rounds than in the top 10.
Scott Wright, president of DraftCountdown.com. The NFL Draft is April 28th. It's right here on 97.3. It's a Thursday night. Laquan Treadwell did not run great, wasn't expected. If he's on the board at 8, would he be a guy that you think makes a lot of sense for Philadelphia?
I don't think so. I think Philadelphia is pretty well set at wide receiver for the time being with Jordan Matthews, Nelson Aguilar, 2 former premium draft picks, Josh Huff as well. All 3 of those guys went in the top 3 rounds. Then they also signed Ruben Randall from the Giants this offseason to give them another big possession-type receiver. So I don't think Treadwell's in the mix for them. And, Treadwell could slide a little bit, but he was also never the surefire top 10 pick that some were making him out to be. He was never this Calvin Johnson, A.J. Green, Julio Jones level prospect. We knew he wasn't going to run well. He didn't. He ran in the 4.6s, and I think he'll come up the board somewhere in the middle of the first round. It probably starts at number 10 in the Giants. That would be the best-case scenario for him. But if he slid into the 20s, would it shock me? No, absolutely not. I mean, he's a very good player, but he's not an elite can't-miss stud at that position. And the speed is a concern, but as we've talked about, he wasn't expected to run well. That was going to be the issue with him, and not only the time speed, but the ability to separate, but he compensates with those ball skills, the ball control, and he wins those 50-50 balls. So Laquan Treadwell is still going to be a very good player in the NFL, and it certainly shouldn't change your evaluation of him as a player just because he didn't run well. And I've said all along, I think he's kind of a Michael Crabtree level prospect, maybe Justin Blackmon. I think that's kind of where he fits in grade-wise. And but it might hurt him a little bit draft day just because wide receiver is one of those positions where speed is important. And maybe it drops him 5 to 10 spots, but he's still going to be one of the first wideouts off the board.
How about Miles Jack? I know he had that injury, but is that going to make him, is that going to affect him on draft day at all?
It doesn't look like it's going to affect him much, if at all. And it's a different situation than, say, Jalen Smith from Notre Dame, because Jack got hurt months earlier, and it wasn't nearly as serious of an injury. And he's already at 80%, he said, already really impressing in before the draft year, even though he's still not 100%. And he's going to be a top 10 pick, and I currently have him penciled in at number 5 to the Jacksonville Jaguars. I think he's the type of impact defender they've been lacking in their front seven. But he could even come off the board earlier. I think he could be a fit for the Dallas Cowboys, might look at him. So Miles Jack's a pretty special specimen at the linebacker position. And not even a stretch to say this is a linebacker that covers like a cornerback. And in this day and age where it's such a pass-happy league, you need those linebackers who can't be exploited in coverage. And Miles Jack, not only can he not be exploited, he excels in coverage.
I want to get your thoughts on Joey Bosa, because for a while back there, he looked like, a lot of people had him going number 1. Then it seemed like people weren't liking him at all. You have him at number 4. What kind of player do you think he'll be?
A really, really good player. And I think he was maybe the victim of unfair expectations to a certain degree this past year. And his numbers dropped off, but still was very impactful. I think if you watch the tape, he was much more dynamic than his statistics might lead you to believe. But he's not a rare talent. He's not a freakish athlete like Jadeveon Clowney, but just a really good player. And the versatility, I think that's maybe one of the more intriguing things, is you can play him all along the defensive line. You can rush him off the edge. You can rush him from the interior. He's just a good football player who does everything really well. And not only as a pass rusher, but he plays the run really well. So I think he's going to come off the board somewhere in that top 5 to 6 overall. And that's really where he belongs. I was debating actually for my overall rankings where to put him, because I have a clear-cut top 2 in Tunsil and Jalen Ramsey. And then I was debating between Miles Jack and Joey Bosa for number 3. And I ended up going with Bosa just because I think he's a little bit of a safer pick at a more premium position. But even though he's not this surefire number 1 overall, can't-miss talent, still a legitimate top 5 pick in just about any draft.
Yeah, and a lot of Ohio State guys in Scott's mock draft in the top 20. And looking over at that second page there, Scott, you got Taylor Decker in there, another offensive tackle. You got Darren Lee, the linebacker. So Ohio State putting a lot of guys out there. And then there's Jack Conklin going to Indianapolis, you think, around the 18th spot. So it looks like offensive line is a spot in the first round that you can get some help at.
Yep, absolutely. And that's a position, too, where we normally see blockers maybe get pushed up a little bit, especially in the back end of the first round. We see guys sneak into the first round that we didn't necessarily expect to at that position. And I think Jason Spriggs from Indiana is going to be a first-round pick. I was predicting since January before the Senior Bowl that he was going to be that guy, and he's basically confirmed that. Great Senior Bowl, great scouting combine. I think he's going to be a first-round pick. It's just a matter of how early in the first round. And one other name to keep an eye on the offensive line that could get pushed up is Jermaine Afidi from Texas A&M, a guy who can play left tackle, right tackle, guard, and probably not a first-round talent, but if guys like Conklin, Decker, Spriggs come off the board than expected, maybe that pushes Afidi up 10 to 15 spots.
All right, Scott Wright, DraftCountdown.com. Let me get your thoughts on then, at this stage, a guy that looks like he's dropping a little bit, somebody that you liked a little earlier but is starting to fall down a little bit.
Well, the first one that comes to mind is Jalen Smith, and it's nothing he's done as a player. It's just the health that's clouding his future. And if not for the injury, he might have been in the conversation for number 1 overall, certainly a top 5 to 10 overall pick. Where it stands now, there's no telling. I have him penciled into the Cincinnati Bengals at number 24 overall. I think that would make a lot of sense, but I'm going to be really interested to see how far Jalen Smith falls. And we're always at a disadvantage outside of the league evaluating players because we don't have access to the medical records. We're not getting the prognosis from the doctors, and so we don't really know how they view Jalen Smith. But so far, the reports from the scouting combine were not positive, and he's going to have a recheck next month, and we'll see if there's been any change. But his stock is very much in flux right now. And one other guy I'll mention, too, that I think could slide a little further than people expect, Shaq Lawson, defensive end from Clemson. You see a lot of people had him in the top 10 overall, but a really good player, but he's basically just a 4-3 defensive end, so he doesn't give you a lot of versatility. You got to find just the right fit for him. And he's not a great athlete. He's not a dynamic pass rusher off the edge, so I don't think he's going to go quite as early as people expect either.
Who's your number 2 wideout in this draft?
Well, it's Josh Doxson from TCU, and it's a lot closer between him and Treadwell than most gave credit for. I actually saw Doxson in person the beginning of the year when they came to Minnesota and they played the Gophers, and I was just extremely impressed. And Doxson really reminds me of a poor man's Amari Cooper. There's nothing he doesn't do well. He does everything to varying degrees of good to very good to excellent. Prototypical size. He ran better than expected in workouts. Outstanding hands, ball skills, body control. Is as good as just about anybody in this class in terms of going up and winning those 50-50 contested passes. So I think Josh Doxson's right there in the running to be the first wideout off the board with Treadwell. And then also Corey Coleman from Baylor, Michael Thomas from Ohio State. Really the value at wide receiver this year is going to be in that second tier, in that, say, 20 to 50 range. I think that's where you want to be if you're going for a wide receiver, because Braxton Miller from Ohio State, Will Fuller from Notre Dame, it could go on and on. There's going to be about, I think, half a dozen, 6, 7, 8 wide receivers that come off the board in that 20 to 50 range.
I want to get your thoughts on Jalen Ramsey, too. I mean, he's a guy that is at the top of the draft. Some people think he might be the best player in the draft. How far down do you think he could fall?
He might be the best player in the draft. I think you can make that argument. He is an elite talent, if nothing else. And I think the only concern with Jalen Ramsey is what position does he play? Is he a safety? Is he a cornerback? He had experience playing both in college, but even if he can't make it a corner, you move him to safety, and he's maybe a souped-up version of Malcolm Jenkins, who's one of the better safeties in the league. And if he's a corner, my goodness, for a guy with that type of athleticism and size and length and playmaking ability, you're talking about one of the top 5 corners in the entire league. So he's right up there. I think he's going to be a top 5 overall pick, and that's conservative. I think top 5 is probably the low end of it. I will not be at all surprised if he goes in the top 3 overall. Maybe as high as number 1, but if I'm the San Diego Chargers, I don't let him get by me at number 3 as a replacement for Eric Weddle.
Great stuff on the draft. His latest mock draft at draftcountdown.com. Find out who Scott Wright thinks your favorite team will be picking. You will find out, as the countdown says, 29 days, 22 hours, 33 minutes, and 35 seconds from the NFL draft. Scott Wright, draftcountdown.com for more on this year's NFL draft. Thanks, pal.
That was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.